Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Season 3 of Revolutionary War Rarities, the podcast from the Sons of the American Revolution. My name is Jim Griffith. Today's episode is titled, May Your Sails Be Full and Your Journey Safe. Now, before we get going, make sure and hit subscribe and the bell so that you will be notified whenever we post a new episode. Now, here we go. A lot of sailing occurred across the Atlantic Ocean during our founding era. Christopher Columbus made his famous trip in 1492, and there have been countless sailings since then. Now, before the invention of the steam engine, sailing across the Atlantic was arduous, one that was fraught with danger and the very real possibility of death. Death by having your ship sink or by having your ship attacked. Pirates, disease, weather, waves, rotting food, human waste. The challenges were endless and the deaths that occurred were significant. Now, today we're going to talk about that. We are not focusing on immigration, but on the challenges of immigration at that time. As always, we encourage our listeners to dig deeper into all subjects that we discuss, as it is impossible to comprehensively cover any topic in 8 to 10 minutes. Show notes are contained in the credits of this episode and are also available on all podcast applications. So who were the people who came to the British colonies? Well, they were the English, the Welsh, the Irish, the Scottish, the French, Dutch, German, Swedish, Finnish, Spanish, Austrian, Russian, and enslaved Africans. Many of the European immigrants were indentured servants. It is believed that 1/3 to 1/2 of all European immigrants came over as indentured servants. Most of the time, the cost of transportation for indentured servants to America and the British colonies were covered as part of their arrangement. In return, they would be obligated to that individual for 4 to 6 years, and that varied, before becoming free individuals. So, let's look at the task of sailing across the Atlantic first. That was a dramatic task in its own right. First of all, nautical miles are the standard distance used for sailing. A nautical mile is equivalent to roughly 1.15 statute miles, which most Americans track during highway travel. Nautical miles is a more precise way of measuring distance when determining the impact of the curvature of the Earth. So the distance from London to New York is 3,803 nautical miles, or 4,376 statute miles. The average speed of a ship at that time was roughly 4 knots, or 4 nautical miles per hour. That is equivalent to about 4.6 statute miles per hour. That means the time to travel from London to New York would be roughly 951 hours, or 40 days, or 1.3 months to make the trip. Most resources say that it generally took 6 weeks, but could take up to 10 weeks, depending on weather conditions at that particular time. Now, the destination was not always New York, and the embarkation was not always London. The destination was generally chosen based on whether they were British, Dutch, or Spanish immigrants. Religion could also play a role, as Puritans would generally head toward Boston. If you had a choice, which rarely happened, and you were a farmer, you might be more interested in a destination further to the south, where tobacco was a popular crop. The point is that almost countless individuals, for almost countless reasons, sought immigration to America. So, what were the boats like? Well, by today's standards, they were almost unimaginably cramped, as they were very small and full of people. So let's look at today's extremes versus the extremes of yesterday. The largest cruise ship today is Royal Caribbean's Icon of the Seas. It is 1,196.7 feet long and 219 feet wide. That means that it is the length of almost 4 football fields end to end. Now let's contrast that with the size of the Mayflower, which was between 90 and 100 feet long, or about 1/3 of 1 football field in length. It was approximately 24 feet wide. The Mayflower carried 102 passengers and 30 crew members in that space. So the Mayflower's length was less than 1/2 the width of the Icon of the Seas today. Now, the Mayflower is not the time frame that we're discussing with this episode, as that happened about 150 years before the Revolutionary Era that we are talking about today. Benjamin Franklin traveled to Europe and back on several ships, including the Reprisal, which was 100 feet long and 30 feet wide. He also sailed on the Franklin and the Berkshire. People like Benjamin Franklin did not experience the complete discomfort that most immigrants experienced, but the travel was still very challenging, and arriving alive was not a predetermined outcome. So, what were the challenges? Well, food to start with. Everyone had to eat, so they chose things that would not spoil quickly. To name a few: flour, salted meats, raisins, dried beans, rices, cheeses, and molasses. They would also attempt to catch fish during their journey. Some ships would carry live animals prepared to eat at some point during the long journey. This would include chickens, goats, and pigs. The problem is that food was exposed to the air, the water, and ultimately the rats that would show up, resulting in the spread of disease. There were some horrible examples of where some ships suffered so severely during their transit that they had up to 40 passengers who died, and the remaining passengers were forced to resort to cannibalism just to survive. That's the story of the Seaflower. For more information on that, visit the website displayed on the screen with the instructions that we're displaying there as well. Now, they would build fires on the boat's deck and cook food in copper pots. Now, as you can imagine, this was yet another significant danger, with the very real possibility that the fire could burn out of control, sink the ship, and kill everyone on board. So what about bathroom facilities? Well, the term head for bathroom facilities on a ship today comes from the location of the toilet on a sailing ship. It was generally located at the front of the ship. It was simply a slot cut into the top planks at the front or the head of the ship. Waste would generally go directly into the ocean, but there are other scenarios that played a role. One is that during bad weather conditions, rough seas and so forth, passengers would simply have to relieve themselves where they were. As you might imagine, this resulted in the ship reeking of human waste and contributed significantly to the spread of disease. I won't dig into this area any further, as it does get worse. Your research will reveal some of the disgusting additional bathroom challenges that existed. Bathing was another challenge. Now, there was minimal freshwater resources on board. If bathing was needed, which wasn't commonplace at the time, it would be done with a washcloth. Now, occasionally the passengers might dive into the ocean if weather conditions allowed, but this was not terribly common, as it was considered rather dangerous. What about sleeping? Well, it certainly wasn't comfortable. It was crowded, the space shared with other passengers, the beds were tiered like bunk beds, the mattresses were made from straw, there was no privacy, it was cold, it was damp, there were rats, and there was disease. There were some hammocks and space for wealthier passengers that were a bit more comfortable. However, the vast majority of those migrants basically lived in steerage and slept in situations like we just discussed. What about disease? Well, most of the people that died before completing the crossing died from disease. The most feared was scurvy. Now, that was later discovered to stem from a lack of vitamin C. But there was also typhus, dysentery, gangrene, mosquito-borne diseases, and sickness from the food they had to consume. Life on a ship of immigrants was boring, uncomfortable, disease-ridden, and full of smells that were almost too hard to imagine. It was cold, damp, and dark, lasting for weeks and even months. I would be remiss if I did not explain that everything that I have outlined so far does not even touch on the subject of the enslaved who were brought to the New World against their will. That is the topic for another episode. Regardless of who crossed from the Old World to the New, it was dangerous and fraught with the possibility of death or attack from pirates or enemy ships. This episode is about the immigrants who were not enslaved. Those immigrants kept coming. Whether driven by the desire for land, religious freedom, adventure, or opportunity, the United States has always represented something that many other countries clearly do not offer. And those immigrants fought through tremendous challenges to make it here successfully. And although the challenges eased a bit in the 1800s and 1900s, it still took a lot of courage for our forefathers to come to America. But the real story is that even today, people worldwide flock to this nation. So the next time you hear someone running down the United States of America, ask them why so many people worldwide are risking their lives to get here. Freedom, liberty, a Bill of Rights that protects everyone, even those whose ancestors were once enslaved. A government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The reasons are endless. This great nation was founded by incredible people who had unimaginable challenges just to get here. And for that, we are thankful they made it. And that, my friends, is another Revolutionary War rarity. To learn more about this subject, we recommend reading or listening to the book Mayflower by Nathaniel Philbrick, available at your local library or wherever you buy books or audiobooks. My name is Jim Griffith, and we thank you for joining us today. Please join us again in 2 weeks for the next episode of Revolutionary War Rarities. This has been a production of the National Society, Sons of the American Revolution, www.sar.org.